My name is Ryan, and today I will be presenting the findings from my literature review on NLP systems and their approaches to racial bias externally and from within. I'd like to start off with a quote that I found really important during my secondary research from Racial Bias in Natural Language Processing by Eleanor Shearer. NLP might make governments more sensitive to the needs of its white citizens, but the needs and opinions of people of color are likely to be overlooked. So the reason I think this is so important is because it really highlights and drives home one of the main points that I make during my literature review. Biases within NLP systems are extremely dangerous to the members of minority and underrepresented groups. When we incorporate biases into our systems, whether intentional or unintentional, they can hurt groups that find themselves the victims of these biases. In my review, I will cover how we can use NLP systems to detect racism and racial bias in everyday society. And then more importantly, I want to explore how NLP systems are inherently designed with their own racial biases, and then I will conclude. So I'd like to start off with covering briefly the lack of diversity in the field of computer science overall. So on this graph on the right, you can tell that the amount of minority students is on the rise, however marginally, but the amount of white male students within CS is still rising at an alarming rate. And it's also extremely disproportionate to the rise in literally any other group of CS students. Additionally, it has been shown that minority students often have less access to the increasing number of resources related to CS and CS learning in the classroom. When we see such a strong lack of diversity in a field that's becoming so important to our future, we have to realize that there's too much room for racial biases to be built into these systems that we rely so heavily on. While biases are not always intentional, the lack of diversity is still an important topic to address, understand, and be aware of, especially if you're in CS. So first I want to cover how NLP systems can detect racial biases in everyday encounters and occurrences. And I really think this is an important task for NLP to address. And as it has been noted, NLP has been really advanced so far in the recent years, and now has the ability to tackle an issue such as this. One of the main studies that we can use NLP for is detecting racial biases using body camera footage of police officers to analyze the language these officers use towards various community members. And so to motivate this issue, I want to first look at how Black Americans are always the victims of an unjust and racist judicial system. Tensions between Black Americans and the policing system of the country they belong to have been at an all-time high, as you may know, especially as of recent, with cases of police brutality way too high to count. We'll take a closer look at how police officers treat Black community members through the language that they use in discourse between the two. In a more recent paper, 3 studies were conducted to determine the level of respect shown towards different community members. In the first study, participants were asked to rate a police officer's language on 5 different dimensions, including respect, formality, politeness, etc. The second study, statistical models were built to visually represent how each linguistic feature used in discourse was perceived, and also each linguistic features that were most common among the different racial groups. And then finally, in the third study, we just took these models and applied it to all the data in the data set. And this actually measured to be about a little less than 37,000 utterances from police officers, which is a good amount of data. And consistently in all the data in all the 3 subsequent studies, we found that police officers show consistently less respect towards Black community members than white community members. So the graph over here puts the log odds ratio of each linguistic feature occurrence by race, as you can tell down here, which one is more common in each of the stops. And on the graph on the left, each linguistic feature is on another vertical graph of the coefficients of importance. And it's basically telling us which linguistic features are perceived as more disrespectful versus respectful. Here, since the graphs are put side by side, we can easily see how the linguistic features that are most common among those perceived as disrespectful are paralleled on the graph of linguistic features most common in Black driver stops. I put a line here to show you visually how easy it is to tell. And I think this is a really good visual representation to supplement the findings of the study. Another important task that NLP can now tackle is the issue of gun violence. Gun violence has always been a topic that has either been severely underfunded or blocked for research by legislation, halting any advances on the issue. However, we can use NLP systems, and they give us a new tool, the gun violence database, all of which consolidates articles and media relating to gun violence all in one location. So before entering the database, articles and media are annotated to recognize shooter names, victim names, locations, dates, times, etc. And then all of this is subsequently added to a database with these features. Information extraction software was run on this database and these database entries to measure the performance by comparing it to the actual labels and features. As a result, NLP systems were shown to perform not too well, and some off-the-shelf systems didn't support identifying race and age, which is a really important factor. In the future, it is the hope that the gun violence database helps NLP systems perform better and makes its output more usable for downstream research. We can see here some examples of how we can take articles and other media from various sources to add features and entities to the database. In the future, using NLP systems and other techniques such as cross-document reference, etc., we can advance gun violence research and use attributes from the database such as race to get a more comprehensive understanding of how detrimental gun violence is in our society. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how there's racial biases within our very own NLP systems. So when we use NLP systems to analyze language, we see a very prominent bias occur in both gender and in race. For example, a study was done on YouTuber auto-captioning, and has found that the word error rate was much higher in women than in men. And this is hurtful for women YouTubers, because those viewers who rely on captions for their videos are less likely to view YouTuber videos from women. Additionally, when people access information online, if there are word errors in the text recognized from these videos, then the search system they are using will fail more often in these cases. In social media, we see a very prominent bias occur in race. Analyzing the language used in social media using NLP systems has been very iffy in the past because previously we have trained the systems on traditionally written sources. And obviously this is troublesome because, as we all know, this is very different from the language that we use on social media. We'll take a look at African American English, which is a linguistic variation of English, and analyzing it when it's used in Twitter. Since it is simply a variation of English, should hold true that any NLP system that seeks to classify a corpus of Twitter data that consists of some AAE, which is African American English aligned tweets, then we should classify that African American English aligned tweet as English. However, after a study was done running 4 language identifiers on tweets of various lengths and with some African American English, we see that authors of tweets who use non-standard English, especially African American English, are often classified as English less than those that aren't. In this graph, the bins represent tweets of various lengths, and since classification of longer tweets tends to do better overall than lower ones, we wanted to make sure we separate them. In all the bins and models, except for one, it was seen that the white aligned tweets were classified with a higher accuracy than African American aligned tweets. And this is dangerous because if, for example, we were to look at the Twitter data from tweets only classified by a particular NLP system as English, then we would be looking at tweets from white authors disproportionately than African American authors. And this will hurt, damage, and continue to suppress minority groups, and may overlook groups that are already underrepresented. NLP systems are becoming increasingly important nowadays. They can perform such a wide array of tasks, from predicting text to detecting racial biases in individuals. After reviewing several studies that were conducted, we found several alarming results. Police officers treated Black community members with significantly less respect than white community members. Additionally, racial biases are present and pervasive within NLP systems. Also, some language identification systems have the potential to impose both a gender and racial bias, often misclassifying African American authored tweets as not English, leading to the suppression of these authors' voices, and can even lead to more damage later on in downstream research. However, there is always promise, and there is promise when it comes to analyzing other data. The gun violence database offers a new way for NLP systems to further advance research in gun violence and how it disproportionately affects racial minorities, a topic that previously had been underfunded or blocked by legislation, but is now being pushed forward through NLP. Thank you.